Salutations to the Truth Core, whoever or wherever you may be on the planet. Well, I'm here once again, and this time I have a riff on astrology, of all things. Recently it occurred to me that I might make a recording and tell you something about my career in astrology, which has been quite unusual and extremely long. But I won't do that right now. I'm only taking a moment to tell you about your other horoscope, and also to tell you something about the horoscope that you may know if you've had your horoscope cast by an astrologer who uses the tropical system of 12 sun signs of equal 30-degree divisions. To begin, it's my pleasure to share with you something that I learned early on in my career. And I learned it from a gentleman named Dane Rudhyar, or Rudhyar, D-A-N-E. And he is, by all accounts, the great modernizer of astrology. In the year that I was born, Rudhyar released a book, at least he was writing it at that time, entitled The Astrology of Personality. And in that single book, he upscaled astrology and placed it for the first time on a legitimate foundation, making it a parallel with conventional and academic psychology, which it is. So if you have the good luck to fall into the hands of a really competent and honest astrologer, and there are some, but not a lot, then you will benefit from a psychological profile that is founded on clear and legitimate terms. And those terms, that framework, is the legacy of Dane Rudhyar. I corresponded with Dane Rudhyar, actually, way back a long time ago. And I drew extensively from the Astrology of Personality. It's a difficult book. It's somewhat overloaded and overdetermined. But nonetheless, it stands as the foundation stone of modern humanistic astrology. Now let's take a look at this expression, this term, sun sign. Well, what is your sun sign? The tropical format of astrology is based on something like a pizza. It's a perfect circle with 12 30-degree sections. And if the sun is located in one of those sections on the day you're born, that determines your sun sign. So there's the Leo section, the Virgo section, the Capricorn section, and so forth. The tropical format is something like, well, a pizza, as I just said, 12 even slices. But it's also something like the framework of the world time zones. So if you look at a map of the world time zones, you can see how they are divided into sectors, and those sectors overlie certain countries. So there is a landscape, the actual landscape of the Earth, the countries and the continents, divided by the time zones, which are artificial sectors. Now just imagine if you looked at a diagram of the time zones of the world, Eastern Standard Time, Central Time, and so forth, and you removed the background of the geographical landscape of the Earth. Well, if you did that, you would have something similar to the tropical model of 12 signs. It is a format that completely ignores the cosmic background of the stars. So, astrology has nothing to do with the stars. Your conventional horoscope has nothing to do with the stars whatsoever. So astrology, as I pointed out in my book, Quest for the Zodiac, which I'm currently revising, astrology is not wrong on its own terms. It's a tremendous tool for psychological profiling in the hands of a competent astrologer. But it is wrongly called astrology because it does not refer to the actual stars in the sky, and it does not refer to those observable star patterns called constellations. So there's another format and another genre of astrology which might be called constellational or stellar astrology. And I'll get to that later on. So what is your sun sign? Bear in mind, some people say star sign. That is completely wrong. What is your sun sign? Well, and what does your sun sign mean, or what does it designate? Well, something that I learned from Dane Rujjar can be very instructive in answering that question. Rujjar pointed out that the totality of the personality of an individual cannot be subsumed exclusively in the sun sign. So, if the sun is in the sign Cancer when you're born, which is from 90 to 120 degrees of the full circle of the signs, then it cannot be said that the totality of your personality is Cancerian. Only one factor of your personality is Cancerian, the solar factor. Well, where do you go from there? Well, Rujjar said that it is the totality of all the planets in the signs and in the houses of the astrological chart, the horoscope, that designates the individual, the dynamics of the individual, not simply the sun sign. This is something that Rujjar said, and it was, for me, an explicit and helpful point of orientation as I undertook the long career in becoming an astrological consultant. By the way, I'd like to add, by way of a short digression, that I always told my clients two things. I presented them with a caveat, a warning of 2 points. First point, I do not predict. Second point, I do not consider that the planets, including the sun and moon, which are not planets, the sun is a star, the moon is a satellite of the earth. I warn my clients that I do not consider that planetary influences drive human behavior. I told them that I will not talk about the planets as if they were causing you to behave in any way. So I totally rejected the causative theory of astrology. Another point that I took from Rujjar, now I don't know if he said this literally or if I derived this from what he said, but I do believe he used the term semantic. So if you ask me what astrology is, I will tell you it is a semantic system for reading the dynamics of human personality. It's semantics. It does not describe a cause and effect situation between a human animal and the various planets in the sky at the time, in particular positions at the time of birth. Definitely and certainly not. So during my career, I made numerous and extensive revisions of the language of astrology. I received a set of tools, as every astrologer does when you take up that calling. And what I did was I changed those tools. I modified the tools, and I modified the language of astrology. I modified the terms, and I modified the syntax that's used to describe the operations of the planets in their various aspects. All the terminology, I totally reworked it into something completely different and unique. Of course, I'm not going to explain any of that in detail, but I will signal you to the outstanding point. I told my clients, I don't use the word sun sign. I use the word sun style. So, Aries may be your sun style. Sagittarius is my sun style. And that is one factor in the total readout of the horoscope. But it is not necessarily even the dominant factor. Sometimes the ascendant, that is the rising sign that is on the eastern horizon at the moment of birth, can dominate the sun sign. For instance, I'll use myself as an example. You're going to love this. Oh, and by the way, another point. When I undertook the study, I cast the first charts for myself and my companion, Jan Kerouac, in January of 1969. I cast them by hand using booklets that one was required to purchase at that time, the Table of Houses, the Book of Ephemerides or Planetary Positions. So I cast my first horoscope by hand, and for the entirety of my career, running 30 years or so, I did the same. I never relied on computer casting for a horoscope. I think I did my first horoscope probably a couple of years later. I did it for a friend. I was living in California at the time. And at that time, I would charge $10 for a horoscope or astrological consultation. When I completed my career, around the time I came to Europe in 1991, I was, I would guess, one of the highest paid astrologers on the planet. By the way, I might add, perhaps to your disappointment, that I don't do astrology anymore. And if I did, you couldn't afford it. No one could. So here's an example, using myself. Every astrologer, in my opinion, should work on their own chart, plus the charts of 2 or 3 people that they know intimately, for at least 2, if not 3 years, before they attempt to hang out the shingle and to consult as an astrologer with others, with clients. So I have Cancer rising, the sign Cancer, and I have the Sun in Sagittarius, and Mercury as well. In my natal horoscope, I have Venus conjunct the Moon. Venus is in Scorpio in the last 2 degrees, and the Moon is in the 3rd degree of Sagittarius. That's called a conjunction ALS, across the line of the sign. So even though Venus is in a different sign than the Moon, they are conjunct because of their close proximity. I have Saturn in Cancer. I have Mars in Leo. Jupiter in Libra. And so forth and so on. Now, back to Cancer rising. There's quite a contrast in terms of personal dynamics between the issues, concerns, and behaviors of the sign Cancer, which is a water sign, and Sagittarius, which is a fire sign, of course. So my Sunstyle is Sagittarius. That's my basic style by which I live and operate in the world. But having Cancer rising affects the total dynamics of my behavior. And there are instances in which the Cancerian factor overplays the Sagittarian factor. So one of the challenges, one of the many challenges, and I can tell you they are hard challenges, that astrologer faces is to assess the relative intensity of the different tendencies in the horoscope. And there are some cases, which I have encountered in my career, where I pointed out to the client that the rising sign would have a tendency to overpower the sun sign. That's not my case. But as I said, in some instances, my behavior will go to the Cancerian mode of expression more than to the Sagittarian mode. But by and large, consistently, through the course of my life, I express myself through the Sunstyle of Sagittarius. So there's a new word for you, Sunstyle. All right, so far so good. Now it's my pleasure to tell you something that you may not know anything about. The fact is that you have a second kind of horoscope. And it's possible that no one has ever told you about this. Remember that I said that the framework of the 12 astrological signs can be compared to the model of the world time zones with the landscape removed. So what is the landscape in this case? Well, the landscape is the skyscape. It's the actual panorama of constellations that you can observe in the night sky. I have various terms for that phenomenon. The real sky zodiac, the constellational zodiac, or the stellar zodiac. So there are actually two zodiacs. This is the basic and fundamental fact, which is not only practically unknown to astrological clients, but it is largely unknown to astrologers themselves. I have not, in my life, met one other astrologer who knew anything about the constellations in the sky or cared to know anything about them. The zodiac they use is Starless. That model is called, technically, the ecliptic zodiac. The other model is the stellar or constellational zodiac. So you have a chart, a birth chart, a birth pattern in both of those formats. And during my career, I put a tremendous amount of work into using both those formats simultaneously. You see, I provided for the thumbnail an illustration of a section of one of the horoscopes that's typical of my work over these many years. I renamed even the horoscopes. I called it the terrascope. So when you came to me, you didn't just get horror, you got terror. So what can I tell you without elaborating for several hours about this other birth chart of yours that you've never seen? Well, it's quite simple, really. Let's take an example, use myself again. So, in my birth chart, which shows the positions of the planets, sun and moon, relative to the Earth on the day I was born, at the hour and minute and place. What you see then, if you look at the conventional horoscope, which is based on what is called the tropical model of the zodiac, tropical ecliptic zodiac, what you see is Saturn in 25 degrees of the sign Cancer and Jupiter in 21 degrees of the sign Libra. See, I also changed even the pronunciation of certain of the terminology. Those indications in the chart are the basis of what an astrologer would tell me about my personality. Depending on the astrologer's definition, the psychological concept of Saturn and Jupiter, they would interpret what those planets signify in the signs that they're in, as well as in the houses. Now, the houses are divisions of the sky around the birthplace. And each one of the houses refers to different sets of activities in life, such as finance, marriage and relationships, travel and higher learning, things of that sort. So you have to look at each planet in the house and in the sign. I have Saturn in the second house and Jupiter in the fifth. So all that is basic astrology. So how does the picture change when you switch to the other paradigm, when you go for the other app, which I now call Celestics? How does the picture change when you go and look at the constellational zodiac? Well, then you see where Saturn and Jupiter actually were against the background of the night sky. They actually stood among certain star patterns. The tropical or conventional horoscope does not refer to these star patterns whatsoever. So in my case, when you convert to Starbase, it's another term, there's a lot of novel terms in my system of astrology and celestics. A lot of novel terminology that no astrologer is familiar with, and no astrologer but myself knows how to use. Saturn in 25 degrees of Cancer, well, that places it in the constellation of the twins. Of the twins. Not the sign Gemini, the constellation of the twins. And it places Saturn actually at the head of the twins. So you see, if you follow me so far, then you will understand that it's possible to actually speak simultaneously of both frameworks. How would you do that? Well, here's an example. I'll use myself again. This is an individual born with the sun in 12 degrees of Sagittarius in the heart of the constellation of the Scorpion. The first part of that phrase refers to the tropical sign system. The second part refers to Starbase, to constellational astrology. And there is no contradiction. The fact that the sun was located in the heart of the constellation of the Scorpion, the heart star Antares, being close to the sun, does not mean, oh, but John, you're not a Sagittarius after all, you're a Scorpio. No. The constellations of the sky do not give you personality types. So there is no contradiction. The horoscope shows you personality type, personality dynamics. The constellational pattern shows you something else entirely. So here's an example, again, drawing from my chart, of how you might be shocked if you were talking to a Celestician. I'm not the only one, by the way. There are some people in training here and there around the world to learn how to use this system that I invented. Suppose you're a client and the client says to you, okay, you have Jupiter in 21 degrees of Libra in your horoscope, as I have. But that places Jupiter in the sky in the constellation of the Virgin. And in fact, in the womb of the Virgin. So if you were to speak in the language, in the jargon of Starbase, you speak in a mythopoetic language rather than in a psychological language. So mythopoetically speaking, I was born with Jupiter in the womb of the Virgin. I was born with Saturn at the head of the twins, Castor and Pollux. And those graphic indications carry a tremendous amount of material which is mythical and psychological at the same time. The general bearing of the real sky birth chart goes to the transpersonal. And so it uses the transpersonal materials collected in the human psyche, produced by the human imagination over many, many centuries. It uses that mythological material in an extremely precise, rich, and expansive manner. So finally, a few more points. You might have inferred that signs are not constellations. That's what the whole book, Quest for the Zodiac, is about. So you might wonder, what do I do about the terminology? The terminology that's attached to sun sign astrology, the conventional type, relies upon Latin names for the 12 signs: Capricorn, Aries, Gemini. Greek and Latin names. Well, I realized when I started to work with the constellations that I would have to give them different names because it would really be confusing to call them by the names of the starless signs. So, for instance, as I said, the sun in my birth chart is conjunct the star Antares in the heart of the Scorpion. Notice that I said Scorpion, not Scorpio. So Scorpio is the sign. Scorpion is the actual constellation that you can go out and see. Taurus is the sign. The bull is the constellation. So I had to come up with 12 other names in the system of alternative terminology to distinguish between signs and constellations. And I decided to use the mythic, mythopoetic, or storybook names, which go like this: Ram, Bull, Twins, Crab, Lion, Virgin, Scales or Balance, Scorpion, Archer, Goatfish, Manitou, and Fishes. So you see there's some novel terminology in there. Manitou is the name for the constellation that has been identified as the water barrier, or Aquarius. Goatfish is the name for the constellation that has been called Capricorn, but it is not to be confused with the sign Capricorn. So the first thing you would learn in approaching Celestics or Starbase is to distinguish between the signs and constellations. And that is really a wonderful path of learning for those who are disposed to undertake it. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Finally, here's a bonus to conclude my talk. Remember that I said at the beginning that the 12 astrological signs are like a pizza. They are completely even 30-degree divisions of the sky that disregard the stars. The constellations are nothing like that. The constellations, Ram, Bull, Scorpion, Virgin, Lion. Did I include the Lion, by the way? I might have skipped the Lion. Crab, Lion, Virgin. If you count all of those, you get 12. But guess what? There's another one. There is a 13th constellation. So in the real sky zodiac, there are 13 star patterns that form the basis of the whole system of interpretation of what I call Celestics. The 13th constellation was called Ophiuchus. I call it the snake tamer. And it is positioned above the scorpion with the lower part of its body merged into the composite stars of the scorpion. So, you have 13 real sky constellations, which you can observe, and 12 astrological sectors, which you cannot observe. That's the difference between the two formats. I make a big point in Quest for the Zodiac of saying that I do not discount or disregard the 12-section format. In fact, I've used it extensively, and I do know how to use it for psychological profiling. But that is just one paradigm. It's like one app. It's one operating system. Good for what it's for, but it will not show you what the real sky zodiac shows you. When you find out, for instance, that Venus in your birth chart is located in the heart of the lion, or that the moon is located in the constellation of the fishes or whales, and when you know specifically where it is, you have, at that moment, been introduced to the mythopoetic language of Celestics. And the implications of that language and the horizon of self-knowledge and knowledge of our species that becomes accessible along that path of investigation, well, I can assure you, it's a treasure trove that surpasses anything that conventional astrology can tell you. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.